Hello, friends. Did you miss us? Yes, the R Weekly Holidays podcast is back, and it is 2024. We are kicking off the new year in style. We have a supersized issue to talk about, but if you're new to the show, this is the show where we talk about the latest R Weekly issue that's curating the latest and greatest in R content, whether it's adventures in data science, new packages, tutorials, and much more. My name is Eric Nance, and I'm as always delighted that you join us from wherever you are around the world. And I certainly hope you and your loved ones, family, friends, all had a safe and relaxing holiday season, whichever ones you celebrate. But yeah, it's hard to believe it's 2024 already. But just like last year, I don't do this alone. I've got my awesome co-host Mike Thomas joining me once again for another year of our weekly highlights. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Eric. I'll be honest with you. I missed this. I hope the audience missed it as well. I missed it just as much as you folks. So I am so excited that R Weekly is back, that we had a great curator this week, and that 2024 is hopefully now off and running for us here on R Weekly.
Yes, it is amazing how this makes me feel a little more normal again, going back on the mic with you, so to speak. It was definitely a busy break for me, but yeah, it's great to get things back in motion on the R side of it. And yeah, that curator, that wacky individual, yeah, that was actually yours truly this time, and I really went above and beyond in a different sense, and this is totally unrelated to the issue itself. But I figured I've seen some cool stuff built with Quarto lately. I saw the new dashboards we've actually talked about on this very show recently. I thought, you know what? For our curator team, we often have to share this rather cryptically formed URL of our public kind of curation calendar. I host it on Nextcloud, which is great, by the way. Nothing against Nextcloud, but the URL they give me for sharing, yeah, that's just not going to be easy to remember. So I thought, well, wait a minute here. Guess what? Because of my streaming adventures years ago in making what I called the StreamR's calendar, I know there are some HTML widgets out there that could play nicely with Quarto to render this same calendar, but with hopefully a more friendly dashboard and give us both a calendar view and kind of a more tabular view of who's on which week for the curation. So yeah, I took a few days. I now have a Quarto dashboard of our public curation calendar, which I'll link to in the show notes. It's hosted on GitHub pages, but it takes heavy inspiration from Garrick Aiden Bowie's Norfolk data Quarto dashboard. And I figured, you know what? If he can do it, so can I. So that is now publicly available. I'll have a link to it in the supplements of the show notes here in case you want to have a look, but it was my first adventure with Quarto dashboard. So after I got that squared away, yeah, it became down to business and curating this week's issue. And also, this is, like I mentioned, a supersized issue because we were off for a few weeks as a whole team. So there are a collection of stories here from previous weeks that would have been released if we weren't on break. So either way, buckle up. We got a lot to talk about, and there's a lot to read after the show, too. But I can never do this alone. I have tremendous help from our fellow R Wiki team members and contributors like you around the world with your awesome pull requests to make all this happen. And we lead off with kind of a nice kind of retrospective-like post of areas that we've talked about last year, especially with respect to how you can streamline your R workflows. And our author this week is the esteemed Nicole Rennie, who has been a frequent contributor to our weekly highlights in the past. And she ends up giving us this nice end-of-year blog post talking about 4 ways that she's learned how she can streamline her R workflows. And each of these hit home with me, and I'll be curious, Mike, how much you've been using these in practice as well. The first area that she talks about, it may sound basic, but boy, is it effective, using template files. Because everyone does this. We have that set of scripts that we created, and then there just might be a new data type, but it's mostly the same, maybe just a couple changes in variables, or maybe a similar service you're pulling from. And yeah, you do the copy pasta, as they say. Well, why not make a more templated structure like Nicola did with her Tidy Tuesday analysis scripts? So now she has a set of scripts that she can create dynamically based on templates for that current week of Tidy Tuesday, and having all of her reusable functions for visualization and other aesthetics and data processing all set to go. And yes, this blog post has links to the individual blog posts where Nicola talks about this in more detail that you can check out. So that is a great way to do it. Low-hanging fruit, as they say, to get you some much-needed savings in time. And speaking of templates, if you find yourself making multiple GitHub repos that look really similar in structure, especially beginning the first time, yes, I feel seen. I do this almost every day at the day job. You can leverage GitHub repository templates. This is huge because instead of like doing the blank repo, maybe getting your RM library in there, getting like your helper scripts for that data processing or whatnot, why not start yourself on the right foot? Have a template structure in place. Nicola's been making great use of this in her workshop materials because she was quite busy in 2023 teaching some workshops. I'm still very privileged that we had her at the R Pharma series of workshops talking about machine learning, and she did a tremendous job with the material on the GitHub repository that she created. But yeah, that is now started in her workflow from a GitHub repository template. I have also made use of this with my fancy schmancy Docker container setup. So now every time I know I'm going to do an R-related project, I want to leverage VS Code with the Docker container and the custom RStudio IDE server edition in the Docker container. Instead of like repopulating all those Docker files one by one, I just have a repository template that I do for my new repo. Makes a heck of a lot of time savings. I only have to change a couple environment variables, and then literally I can just bootstrap that thing in less than 5 minutes. It is, again, a huge time saver for me as well. Now, third up in this list is one I need to be much better at. So I'm coming confession time with Eric here. I do not do a great job of linting and styling my code. Well, guess what? There are R packages that help you with this. In particular, the lint R package and the styler package. These can take away all those spacing issues, syntax errors that you might not detect until you actually run this. If you author Shiny apps, you know what I'm talking about. You're missing that bracket, you're missing that variable, you're in trouble kind of, or that reactive. Don't get me started on that. But yeah, it's not just finding those errors, it's also making sure that your code has a consistent style. And so styler can be customized to meet your needs, but it's going to get you off on the right foot very quickly. And boy, is that helpful for multi-team, multi-person projects where you want to make sure your whole team is having a unified approach of how you style the code. So I would definitely make use of styler and also linter to find all those nagging issues that you would manually have to detect yourself in the old days. And lastly, at the top of the show, I talked about Quarto, right? Well, Quarto comes with a lot out of the box, and I do mean a lot, but there may be things that you want to do to build on top of it. And so Nicola had an adventure in 2023 in the early part of the year on building a Quarto extension to help extend the styling that she did for PDF reports. This is really useful, especially if you want to kind of get that similar flavor as you might have in the past with some of these custom R Markdown templates, but want to have a similar thing with Quarto. These ways that you can build extensions might be a path forward. It definitely does take a little getting used to. I mean, certainly if you're comfortable with LaTeX, you're going to be right at home with some of the styling for PDF output. But in general, I believe it's using Lua scripting, so you might have to do a little level up on that as you go along. But the linked resources on her more detailed blog post can get you up and running quickly. And also for a plug, I mentioned the R Pharma workshops earlier. We had an R Pharma workshop from Devin Pastor about building Quarto extensions. So I have a link to that in the supplements of the show notes as well if you want to really get into the weeds of building a complex extension. It's definitely something you might have to get used to. But again, if Quarto's not doing everything you want out of the box, you can definitely customize it. And I am a very big consumer of extensions, especially for the web-based presentations of Reveal.js. Big shout out to Emo Hunfeld, who has built immense extensions, such as like the code window, even that fun little confetti extension. I'm not sure if he created that or was that someone else. but I make use of quite a few in the Reveal.js space. So again, these are all great things that are attainable in your R journeys with making things a little more automated, a little more repeatable. And yeah, Nicola concludes the blog post with a little intriguing notes on what she's interested in. And boy, she's also going to be pursuing the Nix package train as well. So Bruno's not the only one. I'm also trying to pursue this as well. So we might be seeing some blog posts from her about that. And also, it looks like she's looking at Rust as well, another framework that's been getting a lot of attention in the R community these days. So fantastic way to inspire you at the start of this new year to maybe supercharge your workflows a little bit. So Mike, what did you think of Nicola's blog post here?
I couldn't agree more. I think there's a lot of tips in Nicola's blog post that would help us get off to a fresh start in the new year and start employing some of these best practices for ensuring that your workflows are consistent across projects and make you as efficient of a data scientist as you can possibly be. I think using template files is a great use case. I am so guilty of sometimes going from project to project and copying the majority of a README file, for example, especially where we talk about, handing our projects off to clients and how they can use the RN package that we have, in our deliverable to essentially reproduce the environment that we created it with. And really, I think READMEs for us could be a template file and a great use case that a simple script like the one that Nicola actually has screenshotted here could help with that. I know that there are packages like Use This and DevTools and Golem and things like that will actually create scripts for you. And the code is pretty lightweight, so don't be afraid to do it yourself. I think it's a really awesome trick that can be really underrated as well. Using GitHub repository templates, I will say, is one that I actually do and that we actually do internally. And that is hugely helpful. And I know, Eric, you do this quite heavily, at least within your own personal development work, because you have GitHub repository templates that spin up your whole environment that make use of dev containers, right? So that you can go essentially from project to project and have your isolated environment and your development environment sort of consistent from project to project. And that's really helpful as you go from project to project to ensure that all of the dependencies that you need to have, within your projects that you're sort of consistently applying the same workflow to can get installed quickly and consistently. I've seen a lot of articles lately as well from Rami Crispin, who is trying to, I think, accomplish a lot of the same things that you've talked about as well, Eric. And he has some great content online about how to set up your own GitHub repository templates, I believe, for both R development and Python development using dev containers that have, those dev container.json files to sort of specify how you want your VS Code environment to look, and then a Docker file to manage all of those dependencies. And one of the cool things about that as well is if you're interested in leveraging GitHub code spaces, you can essentially do that, apply that immediately just by clicking a button within GitHub, and it will leverage those dev container assets to spin up that environment in VS Code in the cloud for you. You don't even need to have VS Code installed on your own laptop. I know there's a cost associated with that, but I know it's pretty cool. And when we think about collaborating across teams, these things become really important. And for us, that's not only collaborating across teams, but it's also handing off our deliverable to the client at the end of the day and ensuring that they can reproduce our work and whatever we've created for them in terms of that deliverable exactly within the same way that we intended it to be and the way that we created it. So that's really helpful. And then the section on linting and styling code, it must be something in the water on this podcast, Eric, because I am also guilty of not utilizing the linter or the styler R packages. I am very strict. We have an internal handbook about how to style our R code and our Python code, and we try to adhere to that pretty well. And obviously within our code review process, that's a component of it to make sure that the code is styled, in line with sort of our expectations internally. But I was talking to a client recently who were trying to help set up sort of a good team data science workflow and implement some best practices within their organization, and really trying to convince them that code styling is important for collaboration and streamlining code review and making all of those processes more efficient. And one thing that I think I failed to mention to them that I need to mention to them is how the lintar and the styler package can expedite that process and maybe also provide safeguards to ensure that your code is styled in line with the guidelines that you've set up for your organization. And maybe that's not necessarily the default styling that these packages have, but I know at least within one or both of these packages, you can actually apply some settings to how you want that code to be styled, and you can make some changes to how you want code to be styled internally at your organization, or maybe just across your personal development projects. And I think that that is incredibly powerful and incredibly underrated, which I think is a theme of this blog post as well. I love the section on building Quarto extensions. Quarto is super hot in the streets right now. We are moving everything to Quarto. All new projects are starting with Quarto. One thing that I love as well that I think aligns very well with Nicola's section here on building Quarto extensions is we unfortunately deliver a lot of PDF reports, and that means that we use LaTeX quite a bit. In the Quarto YAML file, you can actually set up that YAML file and set up your LaTeX assets along with that, your .tex files, such that you can have parameters within these LaTeX assets, for example, like the title of your report, a background image in your report, subtitle, things like that, that may change on a project-to-project basis, and you can specify those parameter values within your Quarto YAML file, and those will get passed to those LaTeX files. We do that on every single project, because the project title is going to change. Maybe the image that we'll have on the cover page is going to change, things like that. But it's amazing how well those things play nicely with each other. So if you're someone out there who finds yourself, delivering a lot of PDF reports through Quarto, I would recommend checking out some of the links that Nicola has in this blog post. If you really want to spruce up the look and feel of that PDF report, then I think learning a little bit of Lua can go a long way as well. But there are ample links here as well as on the Quarto website, I think, that can help you really make that Quarto PDF LaTeX report look nicely branded to your organization, or look and feel however you want it to look and feel, and customize it nicely. And Nicola gives us a little bit of a preview into some of the work that she's posted for herself in 2024, and I can't wait to see what comes next from Nicola, because it's always super relevant, always super helpful, and I learn a lot.
Me as well. And there are just so many threads here that I want to implement both in my open source work and in my day job work. In fact, we're even thinking of, for the internal user group I maintain, of having some kind of like maybe quarterly newsletter or bi-monthly newsletter that can go out highlighting the current events and highlighting in the company initiatives. Maybe I could build that with Quarto and a nice little PDF setup like she's done in her earlier efforts. And yeah, the linting thing, I really got to get better with it. What's interesting is that in my dev container setup, I do have a hook to do linting automatically in VS Code with a .linter kind of config file. So I'm getting there on the right track. I just have to actually listen to the advice. But I will say the VS Code is very obvious. When it thinks you did a line longer than 80 characters, it will have a big old squiggly next to it, and it will annoy you enough that you probably will want to change it. But certainly I want to make that more automated too, and just get better habits. But yeah, those two areas, and yeah, beefing up my templates in general. Even just today, I have a project where I want to enhance my shiny bookmarking state hack that I've done at the day job. Instead of having to build that up scratch in each app one by one, I want to do a template structure where I can just fold that in, because I can't quite make it a package yet, but I just want those functions there every time, so I don't have to just manually copy paste it from that existing repo into the new one, change the path, change whatever. Ugh, ain't nobody got time for that in 2024. So lots of things here I want to make use of, and really appreciate Nicola's efforts on this.
Couldn't agree more.
And we're going to shift gears a little bit to a very interesting proposal to maybe a future enhancement to the R language itself that is in the spirit of a recent enhancement that came a couple years ago. And that is making a case for a new pipe assignment operator in R itself. This blog post comes from David Hugh Jones. He's been a very active blogger in the R community, and he makes this case by talking about just kind of the status quo of how R does assignments. You can either have, passing by the value itself, very much saying object, whatever, assign it to, the result of another function or give it a constant or whatever have you. Sometimes it gets really wieldy when you have a variable that, of course, is being built upon a chain of functions, right? This is one of the motivations for the pipe operator itself, which, of course, was first brought to light by the Magrider package, and now, since R 4.1, now has the base R pipe operator built in, which functions largely the same way. So you can construct your, say, data processing steps in a pretty nice kind of streamlined workflow using packages such as dplyr and many others that are pipe friendly. Well, David wants to take this a little up a notch a bit more. What was in the Magrider package that didn't get a lot of press at the time was it had its own version of a pipe assignment operator where it looks like you're going to do processing on a variable and then print it out kind of interactively. No, it would actually look like you're doing this interactively, but actually change the value of the variable you had on the left side. So David's proposing, why not do this in R proper? And he proposes this operator as like the less than sign, pipe, and then greater than sign. So it looks like it's a pipe surrounded by the two signs, and then having that translate to a bunch of functions potentially to do something with that operation. And his rationale is that it could make the code much simpler to read and more expressive, and being able to kind of be more succinct with the syntax that you're typing. Now, this is where it gets interesting here. It's one thing to kind of conjecture this, but he decided to take matters in his own hands and actually look at what is being used in the general, set of code that's being shared in open source of where this pipe assignment could be useful. So he actually has authored his own new package called Code Samples, which apparently has scraped open source code that has been shared on GitHub and Stack Overflow, as well as just the R package examples themselves that come from packages. And he's done a nice little summary here in the blog post about how many times he has detected code that is quote unquote pipeable, but also pipeable and complex, having like more than a few lines in the pipeline operation. And so the post says there's about between 4 and 10% of operations could be simplified by an assignment pipe here, and that could be a potential gain. So you might want to look at this for yourself to kind of see in your code, do you have examples that match some of David's examples here, such as what he has from the Stack Overflow questions? Looks like a pretty unwieldy subsetting of a W variable and then trying to translate that into a more friendly, pipeable assignment operator where it basically streams it down to 4 lines of code technically, instead of it looks like about 16 or 18 in the previous example. I will admit, I've had a little bit of gotchas when I've tried this in the Magrider approach before, and I admittedly moved away from it. But I can see where David's coming from here. So it is an interesting proposal. Now, for those that are new to the R project itself, it does take a bit of time for things like this to land in. And of course, it has to be agreed upon by the R core team and whatnot. So there would be obviously a lot of discussion in play, and that this would not happen anytime soon if it was to actually take shape. But with that said, it is interesting to see what this could look like. So I credit David for taking the time to not only put this out into the public domain, but do some interesting kind of data scraping analysis of existing code to see where this might benefit. So definitely something to ponder. I'm kind of in between on this one. I don't really want to say no to it, but I'm just not sure if I would be the best customer for it. So with that said, definitely food for thought, as I say.
Eric, this is one of those things where at first glance it kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies, but then it might be, this gets implemented, a couple years from now, and then I finally adopt it, and then I feel maybe someday that, I don't know how I lived without it in the first place. I think that happens occasionally. I will give David a lot of credit because he absolutely makes the case for it in this blog post. Doesn't just make the case for it, he actually writes the code to implement it in R source. So he has forked the R source repository, and then he has made a commit that is 1,200 lines of code, C code, I think mostly, essentially that implements it. And kudos to him, hats off. He's putting his money where his mouth is. And I think absolutely, if this does get adopted, if it's something that the community does eventually want, then he will be the person essentially that spearheaded this and that did a lot of the work, I think, to get it into R's base code. I think that probably the base pipe itself for now is maybe still getting adopted. I would love to see some statistics on how widely used it is. We do still see a lot of code, at our clients that contains the Magritter pipe, even new projects that they're working on. I think maybe people are just slow to adopt new things. So I would imagine that it probably wouldn't be any different if this new pipe did get implemented. And I can't help thinking that it looks like a person standing there with their hands on their hips. That's the best way that I would. That's the best way that I would describe it. I always have to sort of see something. It's like seeing something in a potato chip. But when something new comes out, but I think it's super interesting. I have a little bit of trouble. The explicit assignment with the arrow is something that I think helps me for code review to be able to really clearly see when an object is getting created. I know that there are some folks out there, probably more in the tidyverse community, that warn a little bit against the use of the assign function for that same reason, because it's not sort of explicitly showing you where new objects are getting created in your environment as you read some code. That's a function that I've tried to get away from in more recent years. So it's going to be to each their own. I would say if this is something that you really feel could help you, then get in touch with David and support the cause. And I guess the great thing about open source is you can use what you want to use and you don't have to use what you don't want to use, right? I'm sure the assignment arrow is not going away anytime soon. So I'm not very worried. But the only place that I think it goes back to maybe our discussion on Nicola's blog post is adopting some style guides and sticking to them, right? So if you want to adopt this new pipe, if it ever gets merged as sort of the way that you are going to go about assigning objects internally within your organization, then by all means, merge that into your own style guides and into your own consistent practices. But I think consistency is important. I think ensuring that you are writing code that sets up the reviewers or the collaborators on that code for success and to make their life easy and efficient is really important. So that's really all I have on this blog post, my 2 cents. I don't feel super strongly one way or the other. I think it's really, really interesting. And again, kudos to David for not only making the case, but for going through the entire process of actually implementing it and what that might look like.
Yeah, definitely credit to him for following through on what this actually could look like. And, I will never turn down having choice in this space. I mean, there may be others that would have such great benefit of a complex pipe assignment. Have at it, right? I mean, I don't have to use everything that's in our core or these packages I use. I just use what's best for the project and what's best for me. So I will admit it would make me probably have a little harder time doing code review of it as of now. But heck, maybe practice makes perfect. Who knows? But the assignment operator, you're going to have to pry that out of my cold dead hands. I use that every single time. And that helps me reason out kind of what are the key variables in this pipeline. And also, to me, it helps make debugging a little easier at the sake of being a little more verbose. For me, debugging, reviewing are probably the one criteria I'm going to use as I think about whether I would implement this. But again, I'll be very interested to see what the community has to say. So I'll be keeping an eye on, say, Mastodon and other social areas to see what kind of discussion this spurs on. But we may be hearing more about this later in the year. Who knows?
Keep your eye on it. You never know.
Yes, yes. And as we get to our last highlight here, let me preface this by saying when we talk about highlights, we're really more, that's a general term for the areas that we think are most newsworthy and that will probably spur the most discussion in a particular issue. Because I will admit, on the surface, when we talk about this last post, I would not call it a highlight per se, because we're about to get a little heavy here. But I think there are some thoughts that Mike and I definitely want to share about this. So first, if you have been using R, and in particular frameworks like R Markdown, for any amount of time, I think if you're not new to the community, you probably know who is most directly responsible for this. We have Yihui to thank for all these amazing innovations in R Markdown, alongside Knitr itself, which honestly made R Markdown possible. Knitr, for those that aren't aware, is kind of the engine behind frameworks like R Markdown in the spirit of Sweave or Sweave that comes built into R itself. But admittedly, Knitr is, in my humble opinion, much easier to build upon, much easier to customize. And once the R Markdown format came to be, there are just so many lives that have been transformed in professional development, personal development, sharing your data science, blogging with R Markdown and hence Blogdown. In essence, what we call the downverse, you might say, Yihui is directly responsible for this. Yihui had a blog post early this year, just a week ago. And I got wind of this from a somewhat random post on Mastodon, and I almost didn't believe it. What has happened is that Yihui was unfortunately given notice, and unfortunately Posit has decided to basically take away his full-time role, albeit to pay for the support on a contracting basis of the packages that the R Markdown ecosystem depends on. So like I said, aforementioned, like Knitr, R Markdown itself, and the like. This has come to a shock to many of us in the community, and frankly, it sounds like a surprise to Yihui himself in this post. But to Yihui's credit, he has been very gracious in his response to this. He has been very cordial on acknowledging Posit for all the years that he's been able to work on Knitr, R Markdown, and some of the newer team members that have really stepped up to help him. He names a few names, but certainly there are many people that he has collaborated with that have made the R Markdown, this Yihui Downs ecosystem so powerful in this space. So he also mentions that, as I mentioned earlier, the packages that he's been directly responsible for are not going to be orphaned, because if they have anything to do with R Markdown and Knitr, he is being paid to support that. It's just obviously not a full-time job pay anymore. So the one exception to this would be DT. He is looking, it sounds like Posit's going to find someone new to that package. But again, this is just another consequence of this. The other interesting part of Yihui's post is something I've been kind of observing a little bit, and as someone who has been a fan of, say, Linux and Unix for how many years, it definitely rings true to me a bit. Yihui has been exploring kind of a more minimalist approach to some of his software development. I've seen some of the newer packages or newer utilities he's been spinning up. In fact, something called TinyTech, a way to get LaTeX installed in a very streamlined way onto your system without going through the full bloated LaTeX system, things like that. And he's also experimenting with other areas in this, and it sounds like it's more of a philosophical shift. He's not saying that either approach of like a minimalist approach versus an approach like Quarto or even Shiny itself that tries to encompass a lot of things. I think they each have their value, right? It just depends on your philosophy and where you want to take your development. Now, really the part that hits home here is that it does sound like this was a bit of a surprise. And Yihui, for those that don't know, is a father. He's married. He's got his own house. He is definitely supporting his family. So this is now, to be perfectly frank, an uncertain time for him. So he has put at the end of the blog post, he doesn't do this, in fact, hardly ever. I don't remember last time he's mentioned this, but he did say that until he's able to land on his feet with, say, a new role in whatever industry he chooses to be, he has asked for a bit of help because of the little concern he has with this big change. And he does have a GitHub sponsors page. Mike and I, full disclosure, are both sponsors of his work. Gladly so, because we value so much of what he's done for us. But I will say, after this post made the rounds, he has received just an earth-shattering amount of acknowledgments in the comments of this post. I think we have over 300 or so, or at least over 100. It has gone triple digits since I commented on it. And this is just really, if you ever had any doubt of what transformative effect Yihui's had with his efforts in the R community, you just read the comments on this. There are so many that have said, we owe Yihui so much because of R Markdown, what it's done for reproducible research, what it's done for their reporting, what it's done for their being able to connect with the community. Like I said, Blogdown. I use Blogdown. That's how my podcast site was built, for goodness sake. So there are so many ways that we have been leveraging his utilities. So I will admit, I am frankly disappointed at the way this came about. I am, again, giving full credit to Yihui for being so gracious in this post. But certainly, if you've gotten any value out of Yihui's open source work, I think everybody makes their own decisions. But to me, the effects he's had on my development, our journey, my adventures in the community, he was my first interview on the R podcast, for goodness sakes. He actually said yes. I put him into a room at this local conference called MBSW with my haphazard mic set up, and he talked with me. And he was so gracious. I felt like I was, meeting Yoda as Luke Skywalker kind of thing. And I'll never be at Yoda's level, but I'm just saying that's how I felt. And and then subsequent interviews, he has given me some of the most candid thoughts I have ever had on that show is from Yihui. So I feel personally very, I consider him a good friend. Obviously, we live far apart. We only get to interact briefly, but he has done so much for me personally. But if you've had any benefit from Yihui's work, I would just at least consider helping him out in this current time. But I share what everybody said in the responses of this, both in the post and on X and Mastodon. So many people's lives have changed because of what Yihui's done. So I sincerely hope he lands on his feet soon. We're thinking of Yihui. If there's anything we can do, obviously we are here to help. But best of luck to you. But again, the post has so many thoughts that came to mind after reading it. It definitely, like I said, not a highlight in the traditional sense, but the impact Yihui's had on the community cannot be overstated. And I think this blog post clearly shows that. So, that's a lot for me. Mike, what do you got?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with maybe a couple of calls to action. And the first call to action I would say is if you have benefited at all, especially financially, if your salary, what you do for a living, includes, leveraging R Markdown or ever included leveraging R Markdown, and you essentially were paid to use R Markdown, which is obviously free, I would have a hard time, not justifying sponsoring Yihui, in some way. I know a lot of people have, including you and I, Eric, but the value that, and I don't think it's unfair to say, monetary value that the community has probably gained in terms of a lot of employed data scientists getting a ton of value from R Markdown. I'm not sure that's even quantifiable. So if you can, I don't think there's any better use case for making that charitable contribution to Yihui at this time in his journey. He is so that, I guess that's my first call to action, and my second call to action would be, if you have an opportunity within your organization, whether it be a contract opportunity or an opportunity to where you think you need someone with his skill set as an incredible software engineer, reach out to him. Go to rweekly.org, check out this blog post that's called by rstudio/posit, and I'm sure his contact information is at the bottom of this blog post. I know his GitHub he has an about page in that blog post with a contact me link where you can get a hold of him. So if you have opportunities for Yihui, reach out to him and see if they may be interested, because he is not necessarily just this mythical Yoda. He is a person, with a family as well. And I know, at this point in time, especially within tech, there's a lot of folks that are probably experiencing similar things depending on where you work. So it can be a tricky time, and unfortunately, Yihui's been bitten by it as well. So let's try to lift him up, because he has given so much to us and those of us who are data scientists that use the R Markdown ecosystem and page down and book down and all these different utilities. So I guess that's what I wanted to start out with, is a couple calls to action. If you haven't yet, really consider sponsoring him or reaching out to him with opportunities if you see them. Second one, it's hard, Eric, not to be emotional about this, and layoffs in business are a reality. One thing that I think is disappointing to me, and I don't think I'm being too frank here, is that it seemed like it was quite a quick surprise to Yihui after someone who had worked there for 10 years and really given so much to what our studio has been able to create. I have to imagine that, while I understand that a lot of folks worked on Quarto, I have to imagine that a lot of it stands on the shoulders of what Yihui built within the R Markdown ecosystem for many years. So that's really disappointing that it sort of came as a surprise to Yihui. I'm very glad that they are at least employing him as a contractor to be able to work on some things. I guess the reality of business is that, if you don't have enough work for someone, then you probably only want to pay them for the amount of work that you have for them. So I don't know if the transition to Quarto means that there's less work for Yihui to do on some of the software that he was maintaining and working on. That's just, I guess, a guess, and we don't necessarily have that information at this time. But it's emotional, I think, more so because of the way that Posit's structured, as well as a public benefit corporation and not just a regular corporation, right? And it's that creates sort of this dynamic between Posit and the R community that's unique, right? So I think when changes take place at Posit, we feel the effects of that sort of personally in a way, and that's very unique. And I think open source is really rooted in transparency, right? When we're doing open source work, one of the benefits and the really cornerstones of open source software development is that others can see exactly what we're doing and what we're working on, and they can contribute to it and try to help and things like that. So I guess I would like to some of these changes, for lack of a better word, to be a little bit more transparent within the community. It feels like maybe there are some walls being built up between the community and Posit at this point that may not have previously existed. And I think things that come out like this, I think the loss of a lot of our Posit Academy folks, as well as Yihui now, I think there's not a lot of acknowledgement necessarily of it, except maybe by the folks who are directly affected by it. I think it's unusually quiet from their perspective. So I guess I would like to get a better understanding of sort of the directions that things are going, a better sense of transparency, just because of this really unique relationship that the R community has with what used to be our studio and what's now Posit. It's something that it is emotional, I think, to a lot of us. I don't think I'm just speaking for myself. So this was a tough blog post to read. I think Yihui may be taking it better than some of us reading it. He's taken the high road to every extent here in this blog post. He's extremely grateful to the folks that he worked with and who employed him for the past 10 years. He talks about in the comments of the post that in Chinese, the word crisis consists of the words danger and opportunity. And he's optimistic about the opportunity part. And he's not very concerned about the danger, and he really believes it's going to be a blessing in disguise. So I guess if nothing else, I really hope that Yihui, finds a new role for him that he's excited about and loves, and that he really lands on his feet and finds, a next great opportunity for himself. So I think we have a lot of thoughts on this blog post. I'm glad that we talked about it. It is, emotional to me. That's sort of the best word that I can use here to try to characterize how I feel about this blog post. And I think what Yihui's work means to us and what him as a member of the community means to us.
Yeah, I echo a lot of that. And you are not alone. And I've seen posts on Mastodon of others kind of a little concerned about, I would say, like you said, the silence on some of these maneuvers, because as those aren't aware, we did talk last year, Posit did do some layoffs that affected some of their open source division as well as other divisions. And yes, you might be able to hear from other people affected by it directly, but there wasn't a lot said on the public facing kind of communication on that. And as of now, I'm not seeing any new response to this either. I do think this may be a wake-up call in a couple senses. Yes, there is an interesting dichotomy where, unlike most of the tech industry, Posit is a PVC. That puts you into a different lens, in my opinion. Whether you consider that right or wrong, they chose it, right? They chose to be a PVC. That was JJ's vision that we heard in the keynote a couple of years ago at our Studio Conf. With that, I think there is, and again, Eric's going on his soapbox here, I think we are owed a little bit more transparency on this, as those that are not just, fans of open source, fans of data science, but this tooling is immensely important to the work we do, and especially in the open source side of it. Yes, of course, the commercial products help too, but for those that aren't aware, Quarto, when it compiles anything to do with our execution chunks, that's using Knitter under the hood. Guess who wrote Knitter? Yihui. So, Quarto is not possible on the R side of it without what Yihui did. So, whoever Posit is now funneling more resources into that development, fair play, it's their company. Obviously, the interoperability is a big focus for them now. But at the same time, they are indeed standing on shoulders of absolutely giant efforts that Yihui has built here. So again, I do think a little more transparency is warranted here. And, it has spurred on some concerns about future directions. Again, that could be a whole nother podcast in and of itself. I think we'll just leave it as we're interested to see what 2024 holds. But again, full credit to Yihui for taking the high road on everything here. And again, the response from the community has been eye-opening, to say the least. I misspoke earlier. Ever since the blog post, he has been hearing from many, many people, familiar names, new names, those that maybe are what I call dark matter developers that may not comment very much. But when they see somebody that has that impact on their daily work or their daily data science journey, they're coming out to say their thanks. So I do think, just as open source in general, we need to do a better job of thanking contributors, not just in times like this, but regularly throughout the year, because it can pick you up. If you're an open source developer, you're having a rough time trying to maintain this, just having that pick me up really helps too. We don't just have to wait for an event like this. But with that said, full credit to Yihui for being gracious in this, and I would imagine he is going to be hearing from a lot of people about future opportunities. I hope he takes what's best for him and his family, and certainly will be very curious what the future holds for him.
Well said, Eric.
Well, yeah, it's hard to transition from that, but that was a jam-packed summary of our highlight stories here. But we're going to close out with a couple of additional finds that we found in this issue. And yeah, well, I heard you when you heard me mention in Nicola's segment that she's going to be pursuing Nix as a tie-in with R. Well, of course, our good friend Bruno Rodriguez has been continuing his journey with the Nix package system and R. And he has a part 8 of his Reproducible Data Science with Nix blog series that gets more into the kind of the into the weeds of just how open source plays a critical role in Nix itself. And in fact, every package in Nix is simply, I should not say simply, but it is a set of scripts that will take the upstream utilities, bundle it up into a way that Nix can understand, and then we can install that via the Nix package manager right then and there on the spot. And of course, through Bruno's work on the Rix package, he is trying to make that easier from within R itself. But acknowledging that many R users are very comfortable with the RStudio IDE, he's been trying to make that part of the Rix packaging process too, to get a version of RStudio in that reproducible project, so that then it is tying into that custom R installation, that custom set of packages that Nix package system is exposing. Well, RStudio is a bit of a finicky piece of software to compile and run and install manually, especially on that little thing called Mac OS. It's a bit wieldy. So in his post, he actually talked about setting up a GoFundMe to help pay for a specialized vendor to assist with that part of the process for Mac OS users. Unfortunately, it did not hit the funding, but to Bruno's credit, he has actually donated those funds that were contributed back to the R Foundation itself. So fair play to Bruno for at least helping the R project benefit from that request. But I'm going to conclude this additional find summary. Back to Posit for a second. Posit, if you don't know now, you know that Nix is becoming a thing in data science. It's not just Bruno. Many others are pursuing this too. It's your IDE, folks. Maybe you could help out a bit on this too. Just saying. I'll leave it at that. Mike, what do you got?
There's a call to action. No, that's a great find. I still got to get my hands dirty with Nix at some point these days, and I know Bruno has ample resources available to help me do that. One blog post I found that I think caught a lot of fire this past week and was really interesting was from Emily Reederer on Python ergonomics. And it talks about essentially if you are an R developer needing to switch to Python for a particular project or just trying to learn a little bit of Python to keep up. It talks about how to map some of the concepts from R into Python to get you up and running. And just sort of as a quick highlight, some of the tooling that Emily recommends you use to get started with Python. For installation, she recommends pyenv package, which allows you to switch back and forth between different versions of Python really easily. So if on one project you need to use Python 3.9 and the next project you need to use Python 3.10, pyenv allows you to really easily switch back and forth from the command line, I believe, between those two or multiple different versions of Python. You can set one to be sort of your global version of Python, I believe, that you want to use as a default. For data analysis, we have heard a lot about the pandas package, sort of being the equivalent maybe to dplyr. Emily argues that the polars package actually has a syntax that is more similar to dplyr. I agree as well. It's also more performant. Polars is a really, really cool package, and it's really, really efficient for working with data, large data in particular, but small data sets as well. I think it works great for, and I think you'll find that the syntax looks very similar to what you would find in dplyr. Verbs such as select, filter, group by, they are all map sort of between dplyr and Polar, so it should be pretty familiar to look at the code there. For communication purposes, she references the Great Tables package in Python, which is the port of the GT package by Rich Iannone, I believe, at Posit, from R to Python. It's very new, so if you're a Python user looking to author really nicely formatted tables within your reports, I would check that one out. And then notebooks, obviously Cordo. And lastly, in terms of environment management, I think she references the PDM package in Python as maybe being the one that would be equivalent to the renv package, or the one that she prefers the most. So it's a great sort of list of the different tools that Emily uses to get up and running across all of her Python projects, as well as an explanation of why she uses them and how they may be similar or differ from your experience using similar tooling in R.
Yeah, Emily does a fantastic job here. This is something that I've struggled with immensely, even just knowing where to start. I have a couple of projects that, because I'm extending a package in Python for some RSS feed stuff, I'm probably going to stay in that ecosystem for some of my, very in-depth kind of podcasting 2.0 explorations. So having kind of this familiarity of knowing where to go to maybe summarize that podcast database effectively in my Cordo notebook, but with these packages that give me that kind of R flavor a bit. For somebody that's new to Python, I think that is extremely helpful. So this should be your go-to post if you're like me and you're just dabbling your toes into Python for some interoperability work without it being your full-time focus. Just knowing where to go first is immensely helpful, because there's a wealth of choices out there, and you can go down rabbit holes on environment management and frankly bang your head against the wall. I can't tell you how many times I borked projects at the day job because of the Python VM setup gone horribly wrong. Don't get me started on Anaconda. Oof, there be dragons on our HPC system with that. So yeah, I'm sure I'm going to be playing with a lot of what Emily's recommending here quite a bit.
Dev containers.
Dev containers, yes, exactly. I do have hooks in that in mind. If only the rest of my projects could benefit from that. Well, as you can tell, we've had a fun banter here. You can tell it's been a few weeks with Mike and I, so we came with our opinions, as they say. But of course, there is much more to R Weekly itself than us just bantering. The full issue has so many more great content, lots of new packages and updated packages, some that really caught my attention on the visualization side of things especially. So definitely have a check at that at rweekly.org. Also, we love to hear from all of you in the community. And going back to what we mentioned with Yihui, I'm going to make this call out now. I will admit we don't get the whole boost thing very often on this show. I hope that changes from time to time. But for the month of January, if any of you are gracious enough to boost this show with your favorite podcast app or on the podcast index itself, which I have linked to in the show notes, I will funnel that directly to Yihui for the month of January. So if you're interested in supporting Yihui in a different way, the boost would be a way I will personally make sure that happens. So definitely keep that in mind, but also we just love hearing from you in general. We have a contact page on the episode show notes, and also we are somewhat active on the social media spheres. I am more active on Mastodon. My handle is @rpodcast at podcastindex.social. Sporadically on the X thing of @the_rcast, and I'm also on LinkedIn from time to time. Mike, where can they find you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. I think my sort of tag there is Michael J. Thomas 2. You can also find me on Mastodon at Mike_Thomas at fostodon.org.
Very nice, very nice. And like I said, it's great to be back in the swing of things with you. It feels more normal again as we kick off the month of January with this supersized episode that we just gave you all here. Well, that will do it for us. Like I said, we came with our opinions. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We'd love to hear from you, but we will be back with another episode of our Weekly Highlights next week.